On Monday, 9th February 2026, thousands gathered at Sydney Town Hall to protest the visit of Israeli President Isaac Herzog. By the end of the night, the protest had turned tense. Pepper spray was deployed, arrests were made, and videos spread quickly across the country. One video appears to show a small group of Muslim men kneeling in prayer as officers moved in to clear the crowd. Some men were pulled away. Another appeared to be forced to stand. More than 100 Muslim organizations later condemned the incident and described it as an unacceptable interruption of worship. This moment warrants serious attention. Prayer is one of the clearest expressions of religious freedom in any democracy. It is quiet, it is stationary, it is not a threat. When state force interrupts an act of worship, the justification must be exceptionally strong. Operational pressure alone is not enough. The public expects restraint and sound judgment. What unfolded that night did not occur in isolation. It followed political decisions that shaped the conditions on the ground. In the days leading up to the rally, the New South Wales government introduced major event powers that allowed large parts of the city to be shut down and protest movement to be heavily restricted. Demonstrators were permitted to gather but forbidden from marching, and a last-minute legal challenge against those powers failed shortly before the protest began. The effect was clear. Protest movement was tightly constrained. When large crowds are compressed into controlled spaces with limited movement, tension can build rather than ease. As the evening progressed, protesters began calling to march. Lines tightened. Pepper spray was deployed. Arrests followed. Multiple reports described people being shoved, struck, or forced to the ground. Some demonstrators said they were unable to leave safely once cordons formed. A sitting member of parliament alleged she was pushed despite identifying herself. Australia's Islamophobia envoy described footage of Muslim men being dragged from prayer as shocking and called for a public apology. The political response that followed focused heavily on defending the operation. The Premier described authorities as being placed in an impossible situation and urged the public not to judge events based on short clips without context. Leadership, however, is tested precisely in situations that are difficult to manage. If the risks were foreseeable, it is reasonable to ask whether enough was done in advance to reduce the chance of confrontation. Policies shape outcomes. When policies create environments that heighten pressure, responsibility for the consequences does not sit only on the street. Public concern appears not to be driven by a single video. It reflects broader unease about the use of force, the restriction of movement, and the disruption of a visible act of worship. The use of state power demands discipline, particularly in crowded and emotionally charged settings. When force is seen against people gathered in protest, and especially against those engaged in prayer, it is reasonable for the public to ask whether that power was exercised proportionately. Accountability is not hostility toward authority. It is a basic democratic expectation. But the events on the street cannot be separated from the decision that came before them. Diplomatic visits are routine. This one carried unusual moral and political weight. Israel's military actions in Gaza have reportedly caused widespread destruction, large-scale displacement, and the deaths of large numbers of civilians, according to international aid agencies, medical organizations, and human rights groups. Entire neighborhoods have reportedly been destroyed or heavily damaged. Civilian infrastructure has been severely affected. Many hospitals have reportedly struggled to operate due to damage and shortages. For many observers, the scale of suffering is intolerable. Some UN experts and human rights organizations have warned that the actions could amount to genocide, a claim now being examined before the International Court of Justice. Israel strongly rejects these accusations. Across major cities worldwide, large demonstrations have taken place in response to the human cost of what people are witnessing. Against that backdrop, significant protest in Australia was foreseeable. Governments have full discretion over who they host and when. Responsible leadership must ask a basic question before proceeding with a visit tied to such intense global outrage. Will this decision calm the public sphere or strain it? Welcoming a leader associated, fairly or unfairly, with what many people describe as a humanitarian catastrophe was likely to heighten domestic tension. Perception matters in a democracy. When authorities receive a deeply contested figure while simultaneously restricting protest movement, some citizens may feel their moral concerns are being sidelined rather than heard. Social cohesion can weaken when communities feel their voices are being managed instead of respected. Diplomatic engagement does not prevent governments from recognizing large-scale human suffering. Engagement and moral clarity can exist at the same time. Timing matters. Judgment matters. Political leaders are not responsible for every reaction, but they are responsible for decisions that carry obvious risk. Once those decisions were made, safeguarding civil liberties became even more critical. Managing large crowds is complex, but complexity does not lower the standard for the use of state power. When scenes emerge of worshippers being physically removed during prayer, concern is understandable. Trust in public institutions depends not on the absence of conflict, but on confidence that power is exercised with restraint and fairness. What happens next matters. The events of that night went beyond a single confrontation. There were multiple reports of force, injuries, arrests, and chaotic scenes in a tightly controlled area. Questions are now being asked not only about one incident, but about the broader approach to crowd management. These questions deserve clear answers. An independent and transparent review would help establish what occurred, why certain decisions were made, and whether the level of force used was proportionate to the circumstances. Footage, timelines, and operational choices should be examined openly. Public trust depends on that clarity. This is not about assigning instant blame. It is about maintaining confidence in how state power is exercised. At the same time, the disruption of prayer carries particular weight. Freedom of worship is not a marginal right. When it appears to be compromised during a public operation, concern is both predictable and legitimate, but the implications reach further than one night. When large numbers of citizens begin to question whether their rights will hold during moments of political tension, trust can erode quickly. And once trust weakens, rebuilding it becomes far more difficult. Australia often speaks about social cohesion. Cohesion is not sustained by rhetoric alone. It depends on fairness that is visible, restraint that is credible, and leadership that recognizes when public confidence has been shaken. Political decisions set the stage for what followed. When governments proceed with choices that carry an obvious risk of division, scrutiny is not only inevitable, it is necessary. Because a strong democracy is not measured by the absence of protest. It is measured by how it responds when protest emerges. And when a nation hosts a leader linked in global debate to allegations of genocide and immense civilian suffering, widespread public reaction should not come as a surprise. The real test is what follows next, whether concerns are dismissed or whether they are taken seriously enough to strengthen the standards the public expects. In the end, democratic strength is not shown through control. It is shown through accountability, transparency, and the willingness to face difficult questions when they arise. If you found this useful, consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I focus on stories and issues that I believe deserve attention and thoughtful discussion.